That's kind of what I'm seeing in terms of the business place. Anybody want to throw in something on that, or debate me, or agree? Or should we move on?
Take your word for it.
Take my word for it. You want to throw something out here? What? And? You either got to yell or I'm hard of hearing. No, you pass? Okay, okay. Let's see what else. So next month, Microsoft is going to be sponsoring the meeting. And I don't know about this, but they asked me to give a presentation that they haven't really created the presentation on. But, but we know better. So I think Janelle is going to help me out, but we're going to have a 4 o'clock start time. And I got a question for you, because after I determined 4 o'clock, would 5 work better?
5.
Yeah. Okay, let me change it to 5, because once I went through and I took a look at the agenda and the amount of time that we're supposed to invest, I realized that 4 may have been a little too early. So let's say registration begins at 4, but the meeting begins at 5. We okay on that?
You can start anytime. I just got laid off from
All right. So we'll start next month's meeting at 5 officially, meeting start time-wise. So what we'll cover is new features in Server 2012 R2 and moving to the cloud in Azure. So anybody using Azure? Good, bad, complaint? The Microsoft guy says it's fantastic. What else could we say? It's got to be true.
Actually,
What?
I finished the class, I like it. It's really good, but right at the moment, I don't really have a whole lot of uses for it just yet.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you, I kind of have some mixed feelings on this. You know, I go back to the Bell days, command line, and we know that command line is really, you know, that's so last century. That we're moving back to command line with PowerShell. That's way easier, right? But I will tell you, I think Microsoft's headed, I think they've got a lot of life. They're headed in the right direction. Phone maybe not doing so well. We're getting a new version of desktop. And supposedly we're going back to a full office. I mean, a full desktop like what we've had. So we'll see about that. You like it? I don't know. I will tell you, I've had a Surface. The Surface, I think, is fantastic. And the Surface 3 came out. Anybody been playing with one of those? Like it?
Love it.
Love it? You can give it to me if you don't.
I don't like 8.1.
You don't like 8.1. But what about the form factor of the Surface?
It's okay.
It's okay. I got it okay.
I thought you all wanted that.
No, I didn't want a Surface 3. I got the original. What?
So it's almost a great laptop, and it's more than a great tablet. I haven't picked up my iPad in the 4 weeks I've had the thing.
Yeah.
There's still some things where I prefer a regular laptop, but for most things, it's fabulous.
So do you plug in keyboard and mouse?
I've got a mouse for it that I plug in, but otherwise I'm just using
The keyboard that comes with it?
Yeah.
And you didn't get the battery pack with it, did you, in the keyboard?
There is no battery pack keyboard yet.
Gotcha.
Oh, for the 3, yeah.
3's no longer battery.
Yeah, 3's got better battery life.
I'm seeing 8 to 10 hours, 9 to 10
That's
hours.
pretty decent, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Anybody?
Heavy? Just curious.
What's that?
Weight
Is it
wise?
heavy for a tablet?
It's a little bit heavier than the original iPad, 1.7, 1.8 pounds, but quite doable. And the screen form factor is better than the previous Surface tablets. So it's got more. If you've got it in landscape mode, you've got more height to it.
Makes more sense, huh? And do you like the placement of the button?
The Windows button,
Yeah.
it's going to be a problem, I think, no matter where it is.
Yeah, no matter. Yeah, that's what I think.
I like a physical button.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh well, we got what we got. All right, in terms of other announcements, anybody got questions, complaints, anything you want the floor with? Otherwise, you ready for more PowerShell?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so wait, before we start, just because I always think of things in the last second. DEF CON is coming up this week. Sam Bone's down there presenting. And most of you know that Sam teaches at City College, City College San Francisco. So Sam has invited me to teach there. I taught last semester his Introduction to PowerShell. I'll be teaching that again, but it's more of a command line class with PowerShell mixed in with it. They're telling me I'll be teaching some other classes. You also might know I teach at BBC, and I'm not sure what's going on with the program there. If you want to talk about education, we can do that at the end. But I've always been saying this since I got into teaching. Our system isn't a mess. Anyway, take it away, Eric. You want to introduce?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Doug, and everybody for letting us have a combined meeting. Just a couple items. We have Jason Shaw from Cisco. I appreciate you coming on. My pleasure. Have a lot of folks at my office that are using UCS and deploying UCS, and so I wanted them to come up to speed on the PowerShell commandlets from Cisco, and I hope you guys enjoy the show here. A couple things. This August 19th in Folsom, we're going to be doing scripting games. So when we don't have an actual speaker, what I want to get to is where we can have scripting games where we can have challenges and folks can come and practice and up their PowerShell scripting chops. So we're going to start doing that. The first one is August 19th in Folsom, but what I would like to do is, while Doug has, a PAC IT Pro meeting, perhaps, we can, take a conference room down the hall and have a small subset of folks who might want to, go to that, be involved in that. And then as well, what we're also going to be doing is having lightning round talks so if some of the members want to come and participate and kind of show off what they're doing with PowerShell, feel free. I will definitely put something out there and give you a heads up when that comes around. But I'd definitely love to hear what y'all are doing with PowerShell and give you an opportunity to present in front of folks. So that's pretty much it. So, I'll work that out with Doug and Janelle. But that's pretty much it. And then wherever we need to fill in gaps and I can find good speakers like Jason, I'll coordinate that with Doug. We'll have more combined meetings. Again, just introduce Jason Shaw from Cisco. And Jason, go ahead. Thank you.
All right, let me just kill my IM that I just realized is lit, so my apologies. My name is Jason Shaw. I'm a technical marketing engineer at Cisco, and I focus on UCS and specifically systems management. So are any folks here, how many folks here knew that Cisco sold servers? Excellent, that's very good. That, you'd be surprised, that's just starting to really gain momentum. I still go to shows, and there's always some folks that had no idea. So back in 2009, Cisco launched the UCS platform. It was a bladed server platform. I'll talk a little bit about that just to tee up what we've done and why we built the PowerShell library. Are any folks here using UCS, either rack mount servers or blades under fabric interconnects? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. Excellent. Anybody using the PowerShell library already?
Not yet.
Excellent.
They will, though.
So I have 10 slides, I think, tops, and I've got something called a platform emulator that I'm running on my laptop, which basically emulates a UCS domain and is a fantastic tool for learning how to use PowerShell without needing a live system. Anybody can go and download this emulator. Anybody can go download our PowerShell library and start banging on it right away, which I think is really nice for folks that maybe don't have a system or have a system and don't want to mess around with their live hardware and want to do it in a sandbox. So I'll definitely talk about the PowerShell library, where to get it, and show you some of that live as well. And the other slides in here talk about all the areas of Microsoft System Center that we integrate with. Things like Operations Manager, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, System Center Orchestrator, and you'll see a common theme. The PowerShell library is like the glue under the covers that makes everything happen. And it's probably I think one of our most innovative products, so to speak, that we built. And it's a fully, just like our software releases for our hardware, our PowerShell library is kind of driven by our engineering teams. We've got a whole roadmap around things we want to add to it, make it better. We take a lot of feedback from customers on changes they want to see. So let's see. So just a couple of quick slides to tee up, what the UCS system is and why it's interesting to have a programmatic interface to write to. So this is a picture of the UCS B-Series platform. These are all the components that are in play in a UCS system. At the top, there's, actually, I'll start at the bottom. Ultimately, UCS is an x86 server platform. So we sell blades and rack mount servers. Blades or rack mount servers. We're form factor independent. A lot of our magic is in how our management is done and how all of our sort of network access and storage access and everything is kind of centralized around these top two switches that you see here. They're called fabric interconnects. So on the left-hand side, I'll just quickly hit all these, these parts, right? There's an I/O adapter. Inside of the servers, you make a selection for what kind of I/O adapter you want. Think converged network adapters. These cards get programmed, and PCI NICs and PCI HBAs get instantiated on them, and that's what the operating system sees when you boot these servers. They go inside of either a rack mount server or a blade. You can pick, any type of product you want. A lot of customers go towards blades for the most part, just because you can fit so many of them in a rack. But a lot of customers use rack mount servers if they want lots of hard drives or if they want GPUs or something like that. We have blade server chassis, where our blades would go into. And do any folks here use blade systems today from other vendors? If you use blade systems, in the back of these chassis, you normally see SAN switches, network switches, management modules, lots of cables coming in. One thing that we've done really differently is we've replaced those switches with what we call I/O modules. And the job of the I/O module is just to get aggregate bandwidth ultimately up to these fabric interconnects that kind of sit at the top. And fabric interconnects, the next item, are sort of your top rack switch for many racks. One pair of fabric interconnects can service the needs of 160 servers, racks or blades, any combination therein. And inside of the fabric interconnects run, what I should say is probably our most significant innovation. That's UCS Manager, a centralized management software that manages all the hardware device management of these 160 hosts. Programming anything that's required to get that server ready to deploy the OS and the applications. And those things, I believe, are listed on the next slide. The way that you use the system, once you have everything cabled up, is you create something called the service profile. A page full of all the definition of an x86 server. How many NICs and HBAs I want the server to have, what kind of, what level of BIOS, firmware, BIOS settings, RAID controller configuration. I mean, you can see all the list here, all the way down to IPMI, access, very granular things that are really centered around hardware device management. And how I usually describe these two bubbles is, when you order a new server that comes in, it's on your dock. From the time you take it out of the box to the time it's ready to deploy that OS and applications, there's lots of steps in the middle. Those steps and the time it takes to make them happen vary by customer and by operational policy and by how many admins you have. We do all of this, through software, through this service profile. We literally define it in software, push a button, and it goes out and programs the hardware with all of these attributes. And if you think of maybe you've got a huge farm of servers you're getting ready to stand up, some sort of a cloud. You need very elastic, very programmable servers that can be very easily stood up, connected to network, connected to SAN, reprogrammed, repurposed for other things when that first purpose is done. And those are the kinds of things that we do really well. And I'm actually going to go back one more slide just to point out that you can see how these chassis cable up to the fabric interconnects. And if you can imagine 20 of these, which would be 160 blades, everything kind of centers into the fabric interconnects, and that's where your fabric, if you will, your aggregate bandwidth from the chassis gets plugged into those fabric interconnects, and then your connections to your upstream network and SAN, maybe your iSCSI network, they're all centered around these fabric interconnects. So having one place to program all these servers and having all your I/O connections in one place lets us do some really cool things. I mean, I can go out and spin up 160 servers in a very short time and have them configured consistently, same BIOS settings, same, all the things you'd want to, let's say, a Microsoft cluster to have. I want, n number of servers connected to this, with the same VLANs, connected to the same shared storage, ideally stood up very quickly, and then down the road when I want to make change. Let's say I want to go out and add a VLAN to that cluster. How many clicks does it take? How many places do I have to go to make that VLAN accessible by this huge farm of servers? And for us, we go to the software that lives in the Fabric Interconnects, because that's where all those things are stored and kept. That those Fabric Interconnects store all the config information. They are the single place where the network can be accessed, the SAN can be accessed. So a very very different product than what you find out there. So now let's move on to some of the cool things we developed. One thing we're going to talk about here certainly is the PowerShell library. So this slide here shows a quick intro to this slide. The bottom caption would be a UCS domain. We've got an XML API. The sort of the front door to this management software that I talked about, UCS Manager, is an XML API. In this XML API, this is the only API we have, by the way. We've developed one API, all the knobs and wheels to turn, the ability to turn all the knobs and wheels in the system are in this API. And if you've used UCS Manager, you've probably used our GUI and our CLI that we built. Those tools that we've developed are just clients to the API, in the same fashion that our Microsoft System Center plugins talk to the API, in the same way that PowerShell talks to the API, or any other development tools that customers or partners have built. They develop against one API, and it gives them access to basically do anything they want to do in the system that our GUI or our CLI might do. So it's programmatic infrastructure. From one place, I can go in and turn up new servers, spin down new servers, make change to one or many servers. It's a very powerful interface. So let's see. Here's a block diagram, I think, that depicts all of our integrations. At the top, we've got the System Center suite. Tools like Operations Manager for monitoring your applications or your hardware in this case. We've got a plugin for System Center Operations Manager that you install the plugin, or the management pack, I should say, into your OM management server. Make one configuration, which is to point it to the UCS Manager IP. And with that one configuration, now I'm monitoring a whole domain of UCS, 160 servers managed by sort of one configuration made in Operations Manager. Yes. That's a great question. The question is, will this integrate with UCS Central? So UCS Central is a tool that we've developed that sits above UCS Manager. And if you have many domains of 160 servers, UCS Central is an appliance that you can deploy and register your UCS managers to, so that you have one place to manage many, many domains. Up to 10,000 servers is what we support today. So we're actually, UCS Central has been out. I think we've had several revisions of that product. We just launched a new version last week with some changes to the XML API to make that API look very similar to the UCS Manager API, so that we can take our management packs and our plugins and our PowerShell libraries and such and more easily integrate them. So the question is, it's coming soon. Now we've got all the hooks in Central to make it happen. So are you using Central today then? Excellent. So again, Operations Manager, we talked about SCVMM. How many folks here are using SCVMM? We have a plugin for SCVMM, and the goal with that plugin is really just to let administrators stay in that tool and not have to go back to UCS Manager for anything. Stay in SCVMM, deploy their Hyper-V hosts, deploy their VMs, and let's say they need to get to a KVM or determine if the VM that they're looking at is running on a host that might have hardware, and I can bring that information from UCSM into SCVMM. I've got some screenshots where we'll see that. System Center Orchestrator. How many folks here use Orchestrator? Great. So I have customers that use Orchestrator. I have customers that just default to using PowerShell to get things done. And ultimately, our Orchestrator pack is using our PowerShell library anyway, so we cover both bases there. We have integrations actually in the product as well. Not covered here, but we have some network integrations that are sort of built into Hyper-V that are brought out when you deploy Hyper-V on UCS. No, so not relevant for this discussion, but there normally are a couple more blocks in blue. And then at the bottom there's the UCS manager and physical and virtual machines. So let's move over to PowerShell. So I just started getting into PowerShell less than 2 years ago. Knew it was there, had played around with it a little bit, but once we built the library, really had a great opportunity to go and learn what the capabilities are. And my understanding of it historically is that it's been a tool primarily for configuring services, doing more work like in the operating system, in the Windows operating system. And now you see infrastructure vendors developing libraries, storage vendors, server vendors, building PowerShell libraries, letting a PowerShell admin stay in one tool and basically program the whole stack, the hardware, the software, without having to change automation tools, for example. So it's fantastic. Another thing I'll say is UCS Manager under the covers has an XML model. If we were to look at under the covers of UCS Manager, you'd see an XML hierarchy and a set of objects that define everything in the system. A DIM has an XML object associated with it, a DIM in one server, a physical adapter, a physical blade. So we have this exhaustive XML model for the hardware. It's dynamically generated based on UCS Manager discovering whatever it is that's plugged in. We have another tree, if you will, of the model that's all of our logical configuration, all those service profiles you may have made, all XML and accessible in the model. And you can basically query, configure, change anything with PowerShell using all the pipelining capabilities that are there. We take our UCS Manager software. There's what are called schema files, these low-level files that define everything that can be done in our model. We feed that into an engine that our engineering team has built, and we automatically generate almost all of these PowerShell commandlets that are in our library. And there's, I think, greater than, I want to say 1,700 commandlets. I'm actually going to lower the PowerPoint here and bring this up. So I mentioned I had a So I mentioned I had a platform emulator running. This is a virtual machine, running on my laptop. It can be deployed in your hypervisor of choice. I actually have a Surface as well, and I've got my emulator packaged up, or converted, I should say, and running on my Surface as well. We'll go ahead and I'm going to use my PowerShell library here to log into this platform emulator that's running. So I'll run a convert to UCS. Actually, I'm sorry?
Font size?
The font size. Font size, yeah, let's see what I can do here.
Properties.
Better? Thank you. All right. No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Let me run a couple commands before I even log in. So, git command against our module. I have lots of sticky fingers there. Cisco UCS PS is our PowerShell module name. Today, with the current release of our library, we have a total of 1,943 commandlets in our library, which is way more than I ever want to know about or go to a manual to figure out how to use. One of the really innovative things about our library is we built a commandlet called convert to UCS, which lets you run this command. It goes out and sniffs your Java log file that's our GUI connects to and writes to, and any action you do in the GUI gets converted back to the PowerShell library. So I'll show you that. But back to the fact that we automatically generate this, which is something Microsoft really loves. We feed our XML schema files into an engine that our engineering team built, and it spits out our PowerShell library. So when we come out with a new version of UCS Manager with 20 new features, someone in engineering can very quickly spin a new version of the library to take advantage of those features. Even better than that, the way that we built the library is both forward and backward compatible. So even if we drop the new version of UCS Manager today and you're using the library that was from 2 months ago, everything will still work. I can still use convert to UCS to discover how to automate something. You'll just see some extra arguments, some new class names, or some new output, in addition to what you might normally would see resident in the output. And I can still copy and paste that and throw it right back into PowerShell. So a really cool way that we built this to make it very useful and not reliant on how quickly we can, spin a new library. So I'm going to run, let's see, connect UCS. Against the IP address of my emulator. What's nice is any credentials will work to log me in. I'm going to start a UCS GUI session. So for folks that have never seen UCS Manager, I'm about to bring it up. Just take a minute. While that's launching, I'll quickly point this out. This is normally the splash screen you see on the UCS Manager when you first point your browser to the UCS Manager IP. On the left, we have all the tools that a developer would love to know about. Links to our platform emulator, links to our API model documentation, which is also largely automatically generated. So for folks that really want to dig in and understand what's happening under the covers when they're using PowerShell against the system, we've got lots of great info there. So let's see, my GUI should be up here shortly. So you can see my session info. Ultimately, UCS Manager, those Fabric interconnects run a web server. You connect with HTTP and authenticate, get a cookie back. When you use PowerShell, we'll continuously refresh that session, keep it active indefinitely. You have the ability to log into more than one system. I can very easily run queries against many UCS domains using PowerShell. It's great for inventory, great for really a lot of things.
Is there like a showdown where you could like look at 2 of them and see what's different?
Yeah. So I don't know if I'll be able to get to this in the window that I have. I'm gonna show you a location where all of our videos that we've done, all our real featureful demos that we've done in the past. The answer is yes. We have a couple of commandlets that will compare what we call UCS managed objects. I can log into 2 systems and say, give me all the VLANs from these 2 systems, and then show me the differences in the output. And then I can take that output, throw it into a variable, pipeline it into another command, and mitigate the difference. Either delete the extras or create the missing. And so it's an extremely powerful tool for finding differences in configuration. I'm glad you asked that. Because trying to do that with like 3 or 4 different GUI interfaces and clicking and trying to find differences would be almost impossible, and a great use case for using a programmatic tool. So let's see. So now that I've got my GUI open, and this is a UCS domain, an emulated UCS domain with looks like 4 rack mount servers, a couple of chassis, presumably full of blades. Everything that I'd want to do to this environment from a management perspective, creating those service profiles, assigning it to hardware, it'll look just like live hardware. The things that I can't do, obviously, are like open a KVM because there's no real hardware there to open the KVM from, or to load an operating system, for example. But to learn UCS and for playing around with the PowerShell library, it's invaluable. So let me run convert to UCS commandlet. And this again. To UCS commandlet. The command that I get back tells me the actual log file that convert to UCS commandlet is going to go out and attach to. And it'll basically be the most recent Java log file that's been opened for the UCS Manager UI. I can also specify it to attach to a specific file. Maybe I did some config last week and I forgot to try and capture some things. I can still use convert to UCS to go out and look at this log file from a month ago and convert everything back to PowerShell for me. Scroll this down a little bit. We'll go back and do a simple task in the GUI. Maybe make a VLAN. That's an easy one. We look at what VLANs we have actually. So I've got 4 VLANs in my system, and I know the font on this is really small. VLAN 1, 22, 23, 24. Let's make 25. And give it a VLAN ID and hit OK. Now, once I hit OK or save, there's actually an XML document that's getting sent from this, from this GUI or log file, I should say, out to UCS Manager, and you can see something posted in the background. This is the exact PowerShell equivalent to perform that task. So this, these commands: get UCS LAN cloud, pipelined to add UCS VLAN, with an ID of 25 specified and a name of VLAN 25 would do this. So let me try and grab all this and throw it into Notepad. And again, sorry about the font. Let's see if I can. I'm not actually too familiar with how to change the font in this case. We used 28 last time. I know I'm going to have probably a carriage return or 2 in here, most likely. It's probably right here. So let's see. Let's take the ID. We'll change the ID to 26 and the VLAN name to 26. Oh, I probably could do that too. I do the quick and dirty. So I copied this to my buffer here. Let's go back and actually Control C out of this. What I'd like to do is just bring up the GUI so you can see both. Again, I know the font is really small, so hopefully you'll be able to see how quick this pops. Because the thing I really like is how fast this stuff happens. It is the fastest way to make change in the system. So I just dropped that output into my my PowerShell window and sent it to the system. It makes an XML object ultimately in the GUI. It made a new VLAN object with all the properties I specified, which is just a name and an ID. And then it popped at the bottom of the list of VLANs almost as quickly as I hit enter. I only made one object this time, but I could use convert to UCS commandlet to capture much more challenging, much more featureful changes, maybe making a service profile or an entire template, which is a document with a whole lot of change inside, and it would create just as quickly in the system. So for someone new to UCS who wants to use PowerShell and learn how to automate, this is the tool right here. Convert to UCS commandlet we built for exactly that use case. How easy can I bring someone up to speed to learn how to automate something in UCS? I had a couple of admins that I worked with last year, actually 2 years ago, who were building up a big data environment and wanted to figure out how to automate it. So that they were bringing up, I think, 3 domains. They wanted to manually do the first one and sort of provide a template for automating the rest. This admin was more sort of a Unix admin, had never used PowerShell before, so we installed, I think he had a Windows VM on it, or no, he used Windows primarily. So we went and installed our PowerShell library, turned on Convert to, went back in his user interface and walked through all the things someone might do to manually configure a UCS domain. And at the end, we had all the commands sort of logged in the PowerShell window in the Convert to output. So we captured it just as easily as I did, cleaned it up a little bit, threw some variables in there to make it a little more efficient. And he had a template that he could use to configure more UCS domains from scratch. And what took us, maybe 2 hours to do, because I was teaching him as well, was a 15-minute exercise to bring up a rack of big data rack mount servers. So it was very useful. Let's see. So I've got about 20. Any questions so far, by the way? Feel free to ask any questions. Say the last part. Yep, I use convert to UCS commandlet, and then I went back to my GUI and I performed the task in the UI. And anything that I did in the UI, anytime I make a change or something is saved and kind of sent to the system, the output is printed out to the convert to window. I grabbed it, copied it, put it into a text editor, and just made some changes. Now I've got the recipe, if you will, to make a VLAN, so I can go in and edit it. There's certainly a number of other ways to create VLANs as well.
You could pipe that output from the convert to UCS commandlet to a variable, or send it to a file or something.
You could variabilize the things that change when you create a VLAN. And really the two main items in creating a VLAN is the ID number and the ID name, or the VLAN name. So yeah, you could absolutely use some variables in a script, put them at the top, and then add these down the bottom. We also support something called transactions. So and I'm trying to think of the best way to show this. You know what? Actually, I'm going to bring up a video because I've got, instead of me fat fingering some of these commands, let me show you what we've done in some of our videos in the past. And hopefully this has zoomed in enough. The first part of this you saw, we used convert to UCS commandlet to capture a VLAN. But I think if I go forward a little bit, we're going to see me make a whole series of VLANs. Here's a boot policy. The policy that you would, when you want to configure a server to boot, you define whether it's going to boot from a local disk or maybe a USB key or a CD-ROM. Here's an example of a transaction. We have start UCS transaction, and then a whole bunch of stuff underneath, and then a complete UCS transaction. And ultimately, we're creating this, maybe a complex XML document. As soon as you hit complete, that's when it gets sent to UCSM and posted, and this boot policy would be seen in the UI and created. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we do some VLANs too. Like feed it a sequence of numbers, pipeline that into the add UCS VLAN command, and make 1, 50, or 1,000 VLANs all in one interaction with the XML API using again PowerShell. These videos, actually, I know I'm not going to have time to get through them all, but every video that I have on my laptop is out on our communities page, and I have the links for that at the end of this. We've got this is a great video example of using PowerShell for various tasks, and it goes from the basic things that I just went through all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which I think would cover what you asked about, finding differences in configuration and mitigating those changes. And it covers a bunch of use cases along the way, backing up the system. Was there a question?
Yeah, the convert to UCS, that goes back to your existing log, right? So if you did something 2 months ago, it'll find it.
Yes. So anything that you've done on on the PC that you open the UCS Manager interface with, there's a log file that logs everything that's happened. And convert to UCS commandlet can go to that log file and convert any of the configuration entries back to PowerShell. In fact, you can even go to, if you had a live UCS system, you can go to that system, take a traditional XML backup, and then here's the VLAN transaction. Actually, I'm going to pause it for a second. You can actually point PowerShell to an XML backup of a whole UCS domain and convert that entire thing to a PowerShell script. So there's a lot of ways that we've built this utility to function. Primarily, it's run it and then perform your action in your GUI and learn how to automate that particular task. Here's the VLAN creation. Here's a start UCS transaction. We're going to feed a sequence of numbers from 100 to 120. Pipeline it into for each, and ultimately create VLANs 100 through 120. We haven't run the complete yet, so I've run the start UCS transaction. I've done something a little more programmatic in that second line to kind of tee up the creation of 120 VLANs. The UCS PS session gives me my session information that you may have saw when I first logged in, but you can see we've got 21 pending configs. Or actually, yeah, that's true. It's 21 VLANs that I've got queued up, VLAN 100 through VLAN 120. So at this point, I haven't made any change to the system. I'm ready to go and push a button, if you will, and create these 21 VLANs. I can choose to quit right now and discard this, but I'll go and and run the complete UCS transaction and get these sent to the system. So you kind of get status along the way too. Use traditional commands to format the output, make it a little more readable. I can see I've created all of these VLANs with these names and these IDs. Sorry about the font. So this is a good video, and it covers, again, sort of 101 to 301. The other videos that are interesting from a PowerShell perspective are, I got a few in here. We wrote a firmware upgrade script. If you have UCS, you could literally drive your firmware upgrade process. Firmware upgrades in UCS are pretty awesome because of that centralization. Those fabric interconnects store your images, and you go to that one GUI and deploy firmware to 160 hosts from one place. We have a lot of automation kind of built in for how we do firmware upgrades. But that being said, I can use PowerShell to literally do, start a PowerShell script and automate, the few steps that I have to do. Things like going out to Cisco.com and downloading my firmware bundles, uploading them into the Fabric interconnects, walking through the few steps, and kind of waiting for certain statuses to move forward. I can have all of that driven by PowerShell. And actually, I use the script a lot, especially in my lab. Let's see, we've got a great video on WDS. Does anyone here use Windows deployment services for bringing up servers? Deploying OS. This script, I believe, if I remember right, we actually installed the WDS service on our SCVMM host and basically drove bare metal server deployment with PowerShell. Everything that we developed that's seen in the video, the scripts that were written are published on our communities page, and a lot of customers have grabbed them and either used them in the form that they're in or modified them for their environment. But we basically performed a full bare metal x86 OS deployment. We used our PowerShell library to go and talk to UCS and bring up a couple of new x86 servers configured a certain way. The end result was that x86 server PXE booting. We had the WDS server picking up the PXE boot. We were using unattended install files to deploy Windows 2008 and Windows 2012. I should go back a little bit. This script also used some traditional PowerShell libraries for DHCP, for DNS. If I remember right, we provisioned the server, we shut it down, then we went back to UCS and queried some information about it. One of the things that's neat about UCS is you can pool all your resources. We had some pools and policies and templates sitting in the system. We configured several servers that got their MAC addresses out of a pool. So we configured the servers, provisioned the hardware, if you will, shut it down, and then we went back and determined what those MAC addresses were that got pulled from the pool. We went into DHCP and set up a reservation with PowerShell. We configured WDS to serve out a very specific unattended file when that MAC address, that MAC address came up in WDS, and then we deployed the OS. That was the first part of the video. The second part of the video was using SCVMM to deploy, we built a VHD file, a pretty basic Windows 2012 image, captured the VHD, uploaded it into our SCVMM instance, and then we went and configured many servers from UCS. I think we grabbed like 10 of them, built them from a template. Again, they came up and PXE booted, and this time SCVMM fed them a special SCVMM wrapped bootwim file, and basically every server kind of copied over this VHD and booted from bare metal from this VHD file. So instead of going through a full-blown OS deployment, we basically booted the x86 server from the VHD, and it's a great way to bring up, let's say, a Hyper-V cluster, configure them with host profiles in Hyper-V, and bring them up really quickly. So kind of two parts to that video. It's great, and again, the scripts are out on communities. Looks like I've got about 10 minutes left. The other videos, I think, demonstrate our other integrations, Operations Manager plugin, our SCVMM feature set. Any folks here using SCCM? So System Center Config Manager. That's actually the project that we're working on now. Again, a lot of it, under the covers, leveraging PowerShell, and that's to do, sort of day one deployment of UCS servers. Go out and provision from bare metal the operating system and inject our latest drivers. And the second part of that, which I'm more interested in down the road, will be our day two management. How do I take many servers that I'm managing with SCCM and coordinate doing host firmware upgrades and driver upgrades? So that's our next projects that we're working on. Any questions on PowerShell so far? Anyone have any use cases that aren't being met? I know there's only a few folks that use UCS so far.
Is there any roadmap for workflow? PowerShell workflows, or any roadmap?
We'll have to catch up on that and find out how that would fit, what we need to build. I know we're in discussions right now with some new features in PowerShell version 4. I want to say DSC. I'm trying to desired state configuration. Thank you. We've got a lot of great ideas on how we might use that. I know you were talking about a flex pod earlier, and I think that's the exact use case we're targeting. How easily can I build Cisco has something called validated design, CVDs. If you wanted to deploy Hyper-V with a certain storage in UCS, you could go and get our cookbook, and it's probably like 500 pages, and it has every possible knob and wheel you'd want to know about, how to cable everything, how to configure everything. But ideally, if I could, have a sort of a config file, if you will, with a desired state config, and drive the whole thing with PowerShell, because the storage vendors typically have the PowerShell library as well as our infrastructure having the PowerShell library. If I could build this entire rack of infrastructure with PowerShell, that'd be a pretty awesome use case. So that's one of the discussions we're having.
I would say NetApp's further along.
I'm sorry?
I would say NetApp's further along.
I would agree. I think there's a lot of vendors out there that are very interested. They're seeing the great success that other other infrastructure vendors are having with the PowerShell library, and definitely want to get on board. It's difficult to just go out and write a PowerShell library. It very much depends on your architecture. I mean, we had an XML model already, so it was a very natural step for us to go out and build this library and have it, an object-oriented, sort of scripting language like PowerShell interface with our XML model. It's been working really well.
It also has a Python.
We do. Yeah, actually, in the last few minutes, I'm going to pull up our communities page. These last few slides have some screenshots of our integrations, and I put a couple of links at the end to our communities page, which I'm actually going to bring up.
Jason, I don't hate on Python.
You don't hate on Python? we have a Python library as well. The Python library is also automatically generated from our schema files, so it has a very familiar feel. The same sort of classes that you're influencing under the covers can be done in either language. We're open. I mean, we want to provide customers with the SDKs that they want to use in their environment. So Python, PowerShell. We've had some requests for Java.
Is it complete? Is everything you can do in the GUI available for the convert?
That's the best part, yes. And that's because we use our schema files to automatically generate the command lists. So there's like 1,700 of them there. Hopefully you will never know every one of these command lists and how to use them. Hopefully convert to UCS provides you with what you need to automate what you want. But yeah, every knob and wheel is available. There's one thing that's different about our API is it's the only API we have. A lot of vendors that have an API kind of have a private API that they use, and maybe they build software tools with their private API, and then they have this other API that they give to their customers and partners. We only have one API, it's fully documented, and we want our customers, partners, and other to integrate. So everything's there. There's nothing hidden in the GUI or the CLI that you can't do an automation. Like PowerShell, like Python.
How's that help?
If I was going to point out a weak point in the system, it would probably be that we're still fulfilling as much as we can the examples in our help files. I think they're very complete. As we have customers say, hey, where's where's the detailed help on a particular command? Maybe that's where we'll focus some energy. I think with, I think it's PowerShell v3 where we added the ability to dynamically pull help files in. We're going to be taking advantage of that, which will be great. Because right now, the way we deliver additional help is with each new rev of the PowerShell library. But we'll be finding a way to make our library able to dynamically pull down new help information. But I think it's very complete. The user guide, I want to say it's around 30 to 35 pages, but what's inside are like real use cases, things that customers actually do and want. And we're always out soliciting ideas from customers. What are you doing most often with PowerShell? Is it in this user guide? So we can make sure we have some examples. And one more thing I'll say is, aside from the UCS platform, the Fabric interconnects and racks or blade servers, we have a set of rack mount servers as well that also have an XML API. We have a PowerShell library for standalone rack mount servers as well. So we have customers, automating against that as in addition. So let me go to the communities page real quick. Communities.cisco.com/UCS. I know the font is really small on this one. This is our main page where you'll find, hopefully, make sure I'm still on the network. I am. Let's try one more. Communities.cisco.com/UCS integrations. This is ultimately where all of our Microsoft integration. I'll try a different browser real quick. Not sure why that's not coming up. That's what I get for trying to do something live.
So, so even through if you're utilizing VMware, you're still utilizing PowerShell. So,
I'm sorry?
The PowerCLI and VMware, you're still utilizing PowerShell. You have to try UCS on that integration also.
Well, I think you'd be using a combination of the two.
So I'm talking about from the plugin APIs, or are they talking directly to the REST API on UCS?
Well, you're asking about VMware's PowerCLI automating UCS?
With the integration for UCS, what are they driving? How are they driving that API?
I don't know that they have UCS, commandless, if you will, native in their library. I think a PowerShell administrator would use a combination of the two and automate some tasks with one or the other. I don't think they have it, built in their library that I'm aware of. I know we've done some example demos where, full system configuration, for example, or, bringing up a new set of hosts, you would drive some, the UCS piece with our library and the VMware pieces with PowerCLI. Kind of go back and forth, upgrading a cluster, doing firmware upgrades or something like that, sort of evacuate the VMs with their library, sort of prep the host, and then use the UCS commandlets to, invoke the firmware upgrade on the host, and then go back to their library to move the VMs back and kind of roll the cluster. But I don't know of their library having any, sort of built-in ability to automate against UCS. Yes.
The website.
I think it's coming up now.
Yeah. And basically to URL change, it's communities/UCS.
Yeah, communities.cisco.com. What I have are the shortcuts that'll kind of take you right to the area, so you don't have to know the longer URL. And that's what's in the PowerPoint slides. I'll make sure everyone has a copy of this. So communities.cisco.com, and I think this is our main page. So I'm going to find all the categories of UCS here. UCS director, UCS manager. But I want to show you.
Jason, does it have a guide? You might have covered this already for the emulator. Is there a how-to on the emulator?
Yep, the emulator's here as well. So this space right here will take you to Cisco developed integrations. These are the the plugins, the tools, the SDKs that we've built. And I would expect to find UCS Power Tool here, our PowerShell library. I'd expect the UCS platform emulator to be here. Let me scroll down a little. So that the categories on this page, there's UCS Power Tool. The platform emulator is probably on the previous page. I bet someone saw that. That's Cisco.com UCS. Here's the platform emulator. So if I were to click on this, this bucket, if you will, I'm going to find documents, blog posts, and downloads for the UCS platform emulator. So again, this is an OVA, an open virtual machine format. I can deploy this in Hyper-V. I think you might have to convert it first before you can deploy it in Hyper-V, but all the instructions are in a README for that. I'm running this on VMware Fusion on my laptop. I run it on, my Surface. I wish I had the Surface 3 with more memory. That's my one limiting factor with my Surface 1. I run out of memory a little too quick. I can't run many VMs. It's a free download, and it's the few ways to use this. One, I can configure the platform emulator and have it expose whatever I want to see. How many chassis and what kind of blades can be completely configured, and then you restart the emulator and it shows up. If I have a live system in my lab, I can actually configure the platform emulator to point to that, the IP of that UCS domain, and just read-only import its configuration and make the emulator look just like that live system, which is great for going back and having a private playground to test changes. A lot of customers will download the emulator to use our PowerShell library without needing live hardware. A lot of folks will do their development on the emulator and then take their scripts live and on their live system. So it's many use cases. I know a lot of sales folks that will do 90% of their demos on the emulator and talking to customers about UCS. In the PowerShell bucket, if I were to click on UCS Power Tool, there's some great scripts that the community has written and posted. There's a great health check script that someone wrote. We actually had a scripting competition at Cisco Live this year in July. We had about 30 folks, I think, participate. And basically it was, hey, show us something cool that you've done. Maybe your common use cases in your environment with PowerShell. And we had some great submissions. I'll point this gentleman out here, Joe Martin. He's actually our consulting systems engineer. He's up in Redmond. Microsoft is his customer. He's done some amazing things with our PowerShell library. Any folks here have SAN in their environment, proper channel SAN, and need to do zoning and such? He's got scripts that will go out to UCS, deploy all the servers in a domain, deploy many service profiles from templates, go back in and query for all the information that was consumed and kind of, all the worldwide port names, all the MAC addresses. We'll focus on SAN for right now. It goes out and identifies how many storage targets are in play in this environment, all the worldwide names associated with, let's say, 160 servers, and puts together the scripts to zone either a Cisco MDS SAN switch or a Brocade switch in single initiator zoning format, which means every HBA in UCS is in an independent zone with one target on the SAN. And if you've got a big storage array with, let's say, 16 targets on the front end, you've got 160 servers, there's quite a bit of math. It's like 5,000 zones, I think. This script will literally create all of those zones for you. It'll go in and push them out to the switch if you wanted to, or it'll just provide you the output to go and do at your leisure. But something like that is a great example of using an automation tool like PowerShell. I would not want to try and code the zoning for such a large environment like that. So very, very powerful use cases. The firmware upgrade scripts are there. There's lots of good tools. If you're deploying Hyper-V, one thing that's very common is you want to go in and rename your NICs in the operating system. Let's say you've got NICs for clustering, NICs for all the different services in Hyper-V. We've got a script that you can run at the OS that will go out and talk to UCS Manager and get the names of the NICs that you've named in your service profile, and then identify, presumably based on the MAC address, which NIC is which in your OS and rename them for you. So that's a great feature too. You bring up a bunch of Hyper-V hosts, you want to quickly identify who's on what network, rename them appropriately. It's a big time saver, not have to go back and look at a spreadsheet or other. I think I'm out of time. In fact, I'm 5 minutes over. Any questions that I can answer? Was this useful? Hopefully. I know a lot of folks don't have UCS, but hopefully this is a good intro to the fact that we get a library.
Everything was posted on the website.
The PowerPoint slides, we'll be able to post those.
Jason, if you give me that, I'll make it available.
I actually have some cards that have those URLs on them too. I'd be happy to give some of those out.
Yeah. Great.
You could back up a live running system into the emulator, right? Profile.
I'm sorry?
You could back up essentially the live running system and then redeploy it into the emulator, right?
You can. Yep, you can use the emulator. Sorry, when you bring up the platform emulator, there's one of the configurations to configure the emulators to point it to a live system.
Oh, so it'll copy the live system, right?
Yep, it'll copy it. It'll go out, talk to UCSM, and pull it over live. Just in a read-only format from that live system.
It's the same functionality like
Yep. That scenario you got to be careful because you're pulling in all the configuration from one system. You've got like MAC addresses and worldwide names. You wouldn't want to reuse those. More likely, you're probably going to make a pool of a different setup, a different range of identifiers. But in terms of policies, then absolutely. If you've created these group policies or BIOS policies, things you're going to use identically on another system, you could literally use PowerShell to go out and query the policy and sync the manage objects over to another system. That's another great use case.
Parameterize the special sections of that policy and just make sure you dummy them out.
Yeah, for the identifiers, yeah. I use the methodology for building, pools or identifier pools and such, and just kind of put new identifiers in.
Hey, Jason, well, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.